Tonight, you're putting your child to bed. You watch their small chest rise and fall under the blanket, and for a second, you just listen to that quiet, steady breathing. You pull the cover up a little higher. You don't even think about it. It's pure instinct, this deep, ancient drive to protect them from an unseen world of threats, a world you can't even see. But for over 99.9% of human history, one of the greatest threats to that sleeping child was utterly invisible. It didn't lurk in the dark forest or hide in the tall grass. It was on the skin of their playmates, in a shared cup of water, in a loving kiss from a grandmother. For millennia, parents just like you watched helplessly as fevers spiked, as rashes bloomed, as small bodies grew still. You would have done anything to shield them, anything. And your ancestors, against all reason, did something that seems like madness. They deliberately infected their children. If even one of your direct ancestors had failed at this terrifying, counterintuitive gamble, this chain of survival that leads directly to you and your child in that quiet bedroom would have been broken forever. This is the story of how ancient humans vaccinated their kids. It's a story of desperation, of brutal observation, and of a biological wisdom so deep it was written into cultural instinct. Long before a single scientist understood what a virus was, we're going to walk into a village 10,000 years ago, and we're going to watch a mother make a decision that would make your blood run cold. We're going to see why it was the only choice she had, and the evidence we've dug up, from ancient scabs and tombs to mutated viruses frozen in time, will show you that the most profound medical breakthrough in history didn't start in a lab. It started in a mother's terrified hands. Let's begin in the cold. Imagine you are not in your warm house, but in a small hut made of hides and branches, around 10,000 BC. The air is thick with smoke from the fire, stinging your eyes. Your youngest, a boy of maybe 4, is curled against you, shivering. But this isn't the shiver of a chilly night. His skin is on fire. You press your lips to his forehead, an ancient thermometer, and you know. You've seen this before. The fever, a tiny being fighting for life against an invisible enemy. For 300,000 years, this was the deadliest moment of a human life. And then, they did something insane. They started saving scabs, dried, powdered, and blown up your nose. Welcome to the story of inoculation. The aches, the silence that replaces his laughter. A plague is moving through the clans, a sickness that leaves survivors marked with pits and scars. Your older daughter had it 2 summers ago. She survived, but you spent nights wiping her brow, whispering prayers to spirits you couldn't name. Now, you face a choice that feels like 2 nightmares. Option 1. You hide your son. You keep him away from the other sick children, hoping the sickness passes over your hut like a shadow. This is the instinct we all know. Protect. Isolate. But here is the brutal truth of the ancient world. You cannot hide forever. Sooner or later, a traitor will visit, or your clan will meet another for a festival, and the sickness will find him. And if it finds him as a grown man, the outcome is far, far worse. You've seen this too. The strong hunters struck down in their prime, their bodies ravaged because they'd never met the demon as a child. The disease respects no one, but it is especially cruel to the uninitiated. Option 2. It is horrific. It goes against every fiber of your being. You seek out a child who is freshly sick with a milder form of the plague. You take a bit of the pus from their sores, and you deliberately scratch it into the skin of your healthy son. You are, with your own hands, giving him the disease. To your eyes, you are making him sick. You are the source of his fever. For the next week, you will nurse him through the very hell you were trying to avoid. Why would any parent do this? Why would this practice, which we now call variolation, appear independently in ancient China, India, Africa, and the Ottoman Empire? Because those parents, your ancestors, noticed something. They didn't have microscopes or textbooks, but they had the most powerful research tool in history: desperate, observant love. They saw that children who survived the dreaded pox never got them again. They saw that those who got it mildly from a careful scratch often lived, while those who caught it wild from the air often died. They were playing a lethal game of odds, and the scratched infection was the better bet. It was a terrifying, intuitive grasp of immunity, written in the language of survival. And what scientists have discovered in the last 2 decades proves how astonishingly right they were. The ancient method didn't just work. It fundamentally changed the enemy itself. And the key to this entire miracle lies not in the immune system, but in the surprising journey the virus takes when it enters the body through a scratch on the skin versus through a breath into the lungs. Here is the counterintuitive scientific twist. Wait, what? Moment that connects that smoky hut to your child's modern vaccine card. Your ancestors weren't just giving their kids a small dose of the disease. They were secretly changing the very battlefield where the war for the body would be fought. And that simple change of entry point fact card, the entry point, made all the difference between a survival lesson and a death sentence. Think of a virus like smallpox as a brutal, efficient army. Its goal is to invade your fortress, your body, replicate its soldiers, and spread to the next fortress. Now, that army has a preferred route. Its ideal, devastating invasion is through the front gate, your lungs. You breathe in droplets from a cough, and suddenly, thousands of viral particles land deep in the warm, moist, nutrient-rich tissue of your lungs. It's the perfect beachhead. From there, the virus can march silently into your bloodstream, a covert operation spreading to all your organs before you even know you're at war. By the time you develop a fever, the enemy is everywhere. This is natural infection. It's a full-scale, systemic blitzkrieg. But what your ancestor did with that thorn or knife tip was astonishing. She didn't let the army in through the front gate. She forced it to climb the castle walls. By scratching the virus into the skin, she changed the entire first contact. The skin is not an easy beachhead. It's a dry, defensive, fortified barrier. The virus lands there and thinks, this is not the plan. To invade. From here, it must fight a localized, slow-motion battle right at the point of entry. It takes time to establish a foothold in that tough tissue. And that time is everything. That time is the miracle. Because your immune system is not a single guard at a gate. It's a layered intelligence network with a rapid response team and a special forces unit with a photographic memory. When the virus invades through the lung, it overwhelms the rapid response team before the special forces can even be assembled. But when it starts its slow fight in the skin, it's like setting off a loud, localized alarm in a single district of the city. The rapid response team, the inflammation, the fever, rushes to that exact spot. More crucially, it gives time for the special forces, the adaptive immune system's T cells and B cells, to be activated to study the virus, to design a perfect, targeted weapon against it, and to deploy that weapon. All while the infection is still mostly contained to a single, visible sore on the arm. The scratch infection is a controlled, slow-burning fire that trains the fire department. The lung infection is an explosion in the basement that brings down the whole building. Ancient parents, by choosing the skin, were unknowingly choosing the training scenario over the live catastrophe. They were giving their child's body the one thing it needed most, a warning. And the evidence for this is not just logical. We found it in history, in archaeology, and in the very genes of the virus itself. First, let's look at the numbers from history. When Lady Mary Wortley Montagu brought the practice of variolation from the Ottoman Empire to England in the 1720s, it was met with horror and religious outrage. But it worked. The data was stark. The fatality rate from natural smallpox in Europe was about 30%. The rate from carefully administered variolation, between 1% and 2%. It was still a risk, a terrifying one by our standards. But to an 18th century parent, it was the difference between almost certain death for their child at some point in life and a near certain survival. They were using the same logic as that mother. In the hut, a calculated, smaller nightmare to avoid a colossal, random one. Second, we have archaeological evidence that pushes this story back thousands of years earlier than we thought. For decades, scientists believed the story started with written records from 1500s China. But then, they looked at the mummies. Specifically, at the mummy of Pharaoh Ramses V, who died in 1145 BC. His skin, preserved for over 3,000 years, is covered in telltale pustules. For years, this was just cited as the oldest case of smallpox. But then, a sharper question was asked. How did a disease that killed so many children manage to reach a pharaoh in adulthood? The answer is likely that even in ancient Egypt, they understood you could not hide from it. The pharaoh, living in isolated luxury, would have been uniquely vulnerable to a wild infection later in life. His death may be silent proof that the practice of early exposure, common among the populace, was denied to him. His privilege was his vulnerability. But the third and most profound piece of evidence comes from the virus's own genetic history. Scientists have managed to extract and sequence ancient smallpox virus from remains, including a 17th century child buried in a Lithuanian church crypt. By comparing these ancient virus strains to the modern ones wiped out in the 20th century, they could map its family tree. And they found something startling. The virus that caused smallpox for most of recorded history existed in two main forms: variola major, the deadly killer, and variola minor, a much milder cousin. For a long time, it was assumed minor was just a weakened version, but the genetic clock told a different story. Variola minor was likely the older form. The deadly major evolved later. This flips the script. It suggests that for much of deep human prehistory, people may have been dealing with a less lethal pox disease. The ancient practice of variolation might have begun with this milder enemy, but as populations grew and cities formed, the virus found new opportunities, evolving into the monster we remember. And here's the critical part. The practice of scratching the virus into the skin may have acted as a kind of evolutionary break. It provided a controlled environment that favored less virulent strains. A virus that kills its host too quickly in a variolation scenario doesn't get passed on. So, unconsciously, for centuries, human behavior was selectively breeding for a slightly tamer virus. Our ancestors weren't just fighting the disease. They were, in a very real sense, domesticating it. And what scientists found next, in a frozen moment of tragedy, makes the story even more personal. In the 1980s, during the final push to eradicate smallpox, health workers in Bangladesh encountered a heartbreaking case. A young mother, living in a remote village, had a mild case of smallpox. Fearing her baby would catch the deadly, wild form, she did what her grandmother had taught her. She took thread, soaked it in the fluid from her own sores, and scratched it into her infant's thigh. She was trying to save her child with the only wisdom she had. But the strain she had was variola major, the deadly kind. The baby's immune system was too immature. It was a tragedy. When epidemiologists investigated, they made a chilling and illuminating discovery. They tracked every person that baby had contact with. Not a single one caught smallpox from that baby. The infection, introduced through the skin, had remained so localized, so contained, that it never reached the baby's throat or lungs. It never became transmissible through coughs or breath. The mother's ancient technique had, even in its failure, contained the outbreak. It proved the core principle. Skin infection is a biological dead end for the virus's spread. It protects the community even as it, usually, protects the individual. That mother's love, channeled through a 10,000-year-old ritual, created a firewall. This brings us back to you. To your child's quiet breathing in the dark. That instinct you feel, the one that makes you check their temperature, that makes you reach for a bandage, that made our ancestors perform what looked like a horror, is the same instinct. It is the deep-time wisdom of the body, translated into action. We have not outgrown it. We have simply refined its tools. The modern vaccine in your child's arm is the direct descendant of that scared scratch. It is the same principle, perfected, a controlled, localized training exercise for the immune system, without the risk of the real war. We often frame ancient humans as primitive, battling blindly against a world they didn't understand. But this story flips that view. They were brilliant, observant epidemiologists conducting a millennia-long clinical trial. They lacked the why, but they had mastered the how. They knew the what, with a certainty born of generational loss and generational survival. They looked at a terrifying force of nature and did not just cower. They found a way to negotiate with it, to turn the enemy's own weapon into a teacher. So tonight, when you look at that small, sleeping face, understand that you are not the first parent to stand watch in the dark against invisible threats. You are the latest in an unbroken line that chose, against all fear, to be clever, to be brave, to take a piece of the danger and use it to build a shield. That child's safety is a story 10,000 years in the making, written not in books, but in the quiet, resilient code of survival passed from one terrified, loving heart to the next. And the proof that it worked is in the simplest fact of all. You are here to listen, and they are here to breathe.